You've probably heard the name Bob Lazar. Back in 1989, he came forward with a story that, honestly, still sounds like something straight out of a movie. He said he was a physicist who worked at a super-secret facility near Area 51, and his job? To reverse engineer a captured alien spacecraft. For over 30 years now, his story has been one of the most detailed, most consistent, and most debated stories in the entire UFO phenomenon. And recently, that story has been brought to life in a way that is just unbelievable.
So Lazar's story is kind of back in the spotlight, and it's all thanks to a new documentary. But this wasn't just another interview. No, they did something incredible. They used photorealistic computer graphics to rebuild his decades-old memories of the secret facility known as S4.
So what was his reaction when he saw these digital recreations? Pure, utter shock. He said the final result was so perfect, so spot-on accurate, it actually brought tears to his eyes. He said it wasn't just like what he saw, it was exactly what he saw. It felt less like they were recreating it and more like they'd somehow just downloaded the images directly from his brain. And here's where it gets even crazier. The whole process of working with the filmmakers actually started triggering memories he didn't even know he still had. He'd be watching them build out a hallway in the CGI, and he'd suddenly stop them and say, wait, hold on, there's another door right there. He was recalling tiny details he hadn't thought about in over 30 years. Okay, so that brings us to the core of the story. What did he actually claim to see inside this place? What was this technology that completely changed how he saw the universe? He called the main craft he worked on the sport model. It was this sleek, disc-shaped thing that looked like it was made from a single, continuous piece of metal. No seams, no rivets, no welds, nothing. It was almost like it was chrome or 3D printed. But maybe the weirdest part was the inside. They'd bring these super bright industrial lights in, and the walls would just swallow the light. It was incredibly dark in there, no matter how much light you tried to pump in. So how did it supposedly work? Well, Lazar said the power source was a stable version of something called element 115. Now, you have to remember, when he first said this back in the 80s, element 115 wasn't even on the periodic table. We didn't officially synthesize it in a lab until 2003, and even then, it's super unstable and vanishes in a fraction of a second. Lazar's claim has always been that he worked with a stable version of it, that when you hit it with particles, it would create its own powerful gravitational field. That was the propulsion. And this wasn't just a theory on a whiteboard. He described turning on one of the reactors on a lab bench. He said it created this invisible force field that would repel things. When he tried to put his hand on it, it physically pushed him back, like some kind of elastic pressure. I mean, we're talking about a real-life force field, right out of science fiction. But, working with this kind of world-changing technology wasn't some dream job. In fact, the work environment itself might have been the strangest part of this whole crazy story. Look, any scientific breakthrough relies on people talking to each other, right? Physicists talk to engineers, engineers talk to material scientists. It's all about collaboration. But at S4, that was completely forbidden. The whole project was so walled off, so compartmentalized, that different teams weren't allowed to speak to each other. If you needed to know something, you had to file a written request through your supervisor. It's just nuts. Lazar put it perfectly himself. He said, that's not how science works. The security measures that were supposed to protect the project were actually strangling it. I mean, how are you supposed to figure out a propulsion system if you're not even allowed to ask what the ship is made out of? They were, in his words, just killing themselves with security. For decades and decades, Lazar's story was pretty much dismissed by the mainstream. But in the last few years, some really startling things have come to light that make his claims, well, a lot harder to just ignore. Okay, so check this out. Way back in 1989, Lazar described a very specific, very weird way the sport model flew. He said it would orient itself by rolling onto its belly right before it shot off. So, fast forward to 2017, the Pentagon officially declassifies that famous Go Fast video from Navy pilots. And what does the object in the video do? It performs the exact same belly roll maneuver before zipping away, the exact thing he described over 30 years ago. And then there's just the incredible consistency of the man. For over 30 decades, under a microscope of scrutiny, Bob Lazar has told the exact same story, with the same technical details, without ever changing his tune. And in the world of eyewitnesses, that is a huge deal. Stories that are made up tend to change over time. People forget details or add new ones. Lazar's story has been rock solid. So this really takes us beyond just one man's wild story and into some of the biggest questions we can possibly ask ourselves. Because if any of this is real, the implications are just, well, they're staggering. Just think about this for a second. For over 40 years, through different presidential administrations, different generations of military leaders and intelligence officials, every single group that supposedly had access to this secret has made the exact same decision. Nobody can know. The public cannot know this. Why? There has to be a pretty profound reason for that kind of consistent, decades-long silence. And it's a question that, honestly, seems to be weighing on Lazar himself these days. After all these years of being the whistleblower, he's started to wonder if maybe he made a mistake. He's actually said, maybe I'm the asshole, maybe they're right. And there's a good, maybe even a terrifying reason for all the secrecy. What if the truth isn't some happy story about benevolent space brothers coming to help us evolve? What if the reality is something far more unsettling? Some of the briefing documents Lazar claims he read hinted that human beings are referred to as containers. What if we're not at the top of the food chain? What if our whole species was engineered by something else? I mean, these are possibilities that just shatter everything we think we know about ourselves. When you boil it all down, Lazar's story points to a technology that could solve every problem humanity has, or it could give us the power to destroy ourselves in an instant. It's a technology that could literally conquer the world. And that leaves us with one final and maybe the most important question. Looking at how we've handled the power we already have, are we really ready for whatever comes next?